Well, since we opened up our mailboxes last week, literally hundreds of you have sent messages, and it seems as though there's messages, well, as people from all walks of life use email. For instance, we've got a company, we've got a travelling circus, rather, who use Telecom Gold for sending telexes and Prestel for making bookings. And then we've heard from a company who uses email to keep in touch with their sales reps. And they say, in the field, their reps type reports and quotations on lap-held computers. Then we heard from Jack Schofield, editor of the Guardian's computer page, and he tells us he gets articles sent to him by email and he can reply to 6 letters in 3 minutes. And we've also heard here from a profoundly deaf person who uses email daily, and he says it puts people on equal terms. And from some solicitors who use it for company searches and hope to use it for conveyancing. And one solicitor actually said, with email, it should be possible to work more quickly, and that would be good news, really, for house buyers. Patrick Eager, the cricket photographer, often deals with Australia, but uses the system mainly for sending telexes from his own home. And we've even had a message here from a barrister who believes that in the future, legal submissions may be made to court by email, and some cases tried by communications links. Hugh Johnson, the wine journalist, uses email for updating his annual wine guide. And finally, James Galway, the flute player, said, email enables me to stay in touch with my London and USA offices, wherever I happen to be, and my children are also on the system, and we exchange the funniest letters. Generally speaking, everyone seems to agree that email allows messages to be very informal, and perhaps the most informal example of all that we've come across is that of Kitteridge Cowlishaw.
You met your husband through electronic mail, didn't you?
Well, yes, that's right. I mean, that's a good example of someone I never would have met otherwise, because I was working in New York at the research centre, and he was working in Winchester, England. And, you know, we wouldn't have telephoned across that distance because it would have, we wouldn't have found each other at work at the same time of day. There's this time zone problem again. And I wouldn't have written either because we didn't have a formal business relationship, but I knew that he was an expert on design of programming languages. And I had questions about that I wanted to ask. So I could send them off to him knowing I wouldn't interrupt him. He could read them, and if he liked, he could respond when he had time. So I did send a message asking about some programming languages, and he sent them back, and we began to talk about design of languages and other computing matters, and we discovered we had a lot in common. Although I didn't know what he looked like, you see, because that's another nice thing about electronic mail. You're able to communicate directly without being distracted by personal characteristics. So eventually we got to know each other, and the things that we got to know about each other, you might think people can't fall in love by electronic mail, but actually the things that come through in electronic mail, the way of expressing yourself, your attitudes, your thoughts, your sense of humor, all those things come across loud and clear without the distractions of, do I like the way he looks, you know, is she pretty? And so by the time we met in person, we knew so much about each other, and we were so much in love that it didn't matter what he looked like. And when I discovered that, in fact, he was rather too tall for my taste, the other things so outweighed it that I married him anyway.
Kitteridge Cowlishaw and her husband were using IBM's internal electronic mail system, which has around 50,000 of its employees using it worldwide. And many other large companies have their own internal system. But this is the central computer room at 1-to-1, one of a number of public electronic mail services in the UK. This one is owned by Pacific Bell of California. These are the machines where your message would be stored. This is the home of your mailbox. Now, if you live in London, you can reach this computer by making a local telephone call. But if you live outside, you don't necessarily have to pay the costs of a long-distance call. You can use something called the packet switching system. Now remember, when you're using electronic mail, you only make contact with the computer itself for a very few moments. For most of the time, the telephone line is doing absolutely nothing. So packet switching makes use of that fact to keep the costs down over long distances. You dial a local number, which connects you with a small local computer called a pad. This takes your message and bundles it up into small packets of information. Wrapped around these packets is more data about the destination of the message. These packets are then mixed in with packets of information from other people's messages, and the whole mixture is sent by whichever telephone route is best at that moment. At the destination, the packets are broken down and the message reassembled in the right order. The four major electronic mail systems today are British Telecom's Telecom Gold with 70% of the market, and then there's One-to-One here with 20%, EasyLink, which is run by Cable and Wireless, and Comet, which was developed by British Leyland. And there's also BT's Prestel, which has limited messaging facilities. And all of these systems use BT's packet switching service. But the extraordinary thing is that if you're on one system, you can't at present send a message to someone who's on another. Even BT's Prestel and Telecom Gold haven't been able to interconnect until very recently. Last year, One-to-One did offer to provide the links with the other systems, but for one reason or another, they just weren't interested.
Well, despite all the gibberish that I seem to be typing then, both those messages actually did get through to Fred OK, which was a bit of a surprise. I've now been joined by Roger Dean from One-to-One and Clem Jones from British Telecoms. Now, why can't you two get your act together?
Well, a year ago, you asked me why the various services couldn't talk to each other. Well, now they can. Through my efforts and the cooperation of the other electronic mail suppliers, customers on Comet, EasyLink, Telecom Gold and One-to-One can in fact now talk to each other. It brings together the critical mass that we need, and now you can talk to hundreds of thousands instead of just thousands.
Clem, this must have been very recent, because that wasn't the case when we made that film, and that's only about 4 weeks ago.
Yes, I think two things have happened. One, as Roger says, we've recently put together an experiment to enable those to talk together, and that's proved very useful. And we are now into tests on the full system interworking called X400, which is joining all the private and public systems together.
Well, thank you. I'll be coming back to you in a moment. Fred?
Well, electronic mail is particularly useful when you're travelling, especially so, you might think, if you're travelling abroad.
Good morning. I want to book into the Amsterdam flight, please.
Smoking or none for you?
I don't mind as long as it's an aisle seat.
Ladies and gentlemen, are the toilets and washrooms at the rear of the aircraft. I'd ask you to remain seated until the seatbelt signs are switched off. During the flight to Amsterdam, to serve you a drink from our bar, followed by a light snack, with a choice of tea or coffee. Thank you.
Now, with a portable computer, you can take your office with you literally wherever you go. And of course, you can get on with anything that you want to do, typing letters or scripts. And the great thing about being up here is that I don't think I'm going to be interrupted by the telephone. When a journalist, salesman or businessman gets back on terra firma, they may well want to contact their office and send what they've written or see if there's any messages. The longer the messages, the more useful electronic mail becomes. Ah, just what I needed, a phone. And hopefully I'll be able to fix this, the acoustic coupler to the handset. Nope, it doesn't fit. Obviously what I need is a standard payphone. Here's a payphone. Let's hope the receiver is the right shape. Yes, it is. Well, I could, of course, call London direct and use email in the usual way, but this would be rather expensive and it could be unreliable because the international lines are sometimes poor and that would corrupt the data. Now, there is another problem, it's a purely practical one. Unless I could use a phone card to make this call, I'd be stuck with shoveling coins in all the way through it. I wouldn't be able to hear the pips, and all in all, it would be a very frustrating business. In many developed countries, it is possible to make arrangements to use a local data service to get connected to the international packet switching system and get your message through that way. Well, that's what I've done here in Holland. So the next thing I've got to do is get some power on the computer, select telecom mode, and make one local call. And the cost of that call, 1 guilder, about 30 pence. 850161. I've got a line. So connect the phone up to the coupler. And it's working. Now sometimes noise on the line produces odd characters on the screen. Yeah, we've got some there. Right, what's my Dutch ID? WWD 020. Password. Can't forget that, can you? Right. And now I'm into the Dutch Memocom system, which is similar to Telecom Gold. Now, here's the magic bit. If I type SYS81, it should connect me automatically via the international system to Telecom Gold in London, where I've got my mailbox. And I'm in. It's great. Right, onwards. ID BBC 007. Password. I'm not going to tell you what that is. Fine. Right, well, now I'm into Gold, I can upload all this writing I've been doing on the plane and send it back to the office. So I want now send BBC 001. I'm now the subject. Yeah. Text. Now I want to upload it. And off it goes. Lovely, and as soon as the text has finished going up through the screen, I'll know that that's departed. And those numbers confirm it's arrived in London. Very nice, off I go. Off, that gets me off Telecom Gold. That gets me out of the Memocom system. It really is very convenient, and as you saw, it's very simple to use once you've got the hang of it, and it only takes a few minutes to send or receive a couple of pages of text. But although it only costs 30 pence to make that local call, it does cost £30 to register with the Dutch system, and there's a monthly charge. Well, the trouble is, as yet, there's no international agreement that allows a visitor like myself to arrive in a foreign country, to get through to home using the local system, and then be billed for it later. And in other countries, it's much more difficult than it has been here in Holland. Not much by way of encouragement, really, for anyone who travels to a lot of different countries. I shouldn't think they'd even bother to look into it. So, until the international telephone services get their act together, it looks as though this facility is going to remain largely undiscovered.
Well, as anyone who uses email regularly will know, what you do if you get a noisy line is simply redial, and then you hopefully get a good one. Right, gentlemen, what I'd really like to know from you is, when will I be able to take a portable micro to any country and still be able to pay for the bill back here in the UK?
Well, the various telephone authorities are working on international agreement, but it so happens that technology's beaten them to it. This little product was launched last week. It fits between the audio coupler that Lesley was using and the terminal, and has in it what's called a smart card, which is a small card with a computer chip in the corner there where the gold spot is, and within that chip there is both information about how to get through the various international services and a financial credit to enable you to use the service, and you buy this back at home and you can use it anywhere and you pay nothing else.
We've had another letter from Mr. Gaunt, and he says, why do I have to pay to receive messages? It's rather strange, that.
Well, with one-to-one, we do give you the first 30 seconds free, and you can then see if there is any mail waiting. But if you're very quick, you can also read the messages. However, in the States, this is an issue, and I believe that eventually people will just be charged as sending letters. Sending email will be the same.
Lesley, have we got any messages?
Yeah, well, I've been keeping an eye on the messages coming through during the day, and there's a point here for Clem, I think. It comes from a group of solicitors, and they ask, is there any possibility of seeing a paper directory for the users on Telecom Gold?
Yes, well, there is an electronic directory which covers the majority of the Telecom Gold users, some thousands of people, and we are working on producing a paper one.
Yes, because presumably the electronic one's pretty expensive, really.
Well, you have to be online to use it, yes,
Yeah.
so the paper one does have some advantages,
So it
and
is
we are
coming.
working on it, yes.
Great.
Tell me why the documentation's so poor. We had a letter here from Andy Bromsgrove asking that.
Well, I believe that one-to-one is probably the simplest service. We only have 5 commands, and one of those is log off. But we can condense our instructions onto just a credit card.
Well, if you believe that, Mr. Bromsgrove, well done. There's more information about electronic mail in our notes, including some helpful hints on how to keep your bills down.
Well, next week is our last show before Christmas. We'll be looking at some ways of making music on your home micro and how one Californian wine grower is using computers to improve the quality of his wines. But until then, goodbye.